Chapter 11, Ruins of First Judgment. The ruins did not announce themselves. No pillars on the horizon, no sacred glow, no warning bells in my blood. One moment we were threading through slate-gray hills, veined with dead grass and frost-burned stone, and the next the land simply opened. The earth sloped downward in a shallow, uneven bowl, as if something immense had once pressed there and then been lifted away. Wind slid through the hollow with a low, breath-like sound. Not a howl, not a whisper, a sigh. "This is it," Caelan said quietly. He hadn't stopped walking, but his hand rested on the emerald curve of his bow as if he'd reached the edge of something sharp. I slowed, without meaning to. Nothing here looked holy. That was the first wrongness. First Judgment was supposed to be the birthplace of the radiant Tribunal, the site where the gods first entrusted mortals with judgment, where the light had descended in full clarity and carved law into the world. Every fresco I had ever studied showed blinding radiance, perfect symmetry, towers raised by divine will alone. Here there were only broken foundations and the suggestion of walls, half swallowed by earth and time. Stone teeth jutted at odd angles. Circular platforms lay cracked and split, their sigils worn down to almost nothing. No shrine stood intact, no altar remained whole, and yet my chest felt tight, not with fear, with recognition. Maren felt it too. I could tell by the way her jaw set, by how she scanned the ruins not for enemies, but for something else. Guilt, maybe, or memory that wasn't hers. Lisa had gone quiet. Her fire, which usually flickered unconsciously around her fingers when she was thinking, was utterly still. Bram stopped at the edge of the bowl and removed his gloves. He knelt, pressing one broad palm to the stone like a physician checking for breath. Keth frowned. "This place smells like truth," he said finally. "Old truth." Caelan shot him a look. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Keth snorted. "Truth always is." I stepped forward, the moment my boot crossed the threshold. Not a line, not a gate, just an invisible sense. The light inside me faltered, not vanished, faltered, like a held breath released too quickly. I staggered, just a fraction, but Maren was there instantly. Fingers brushing my elbow. "You felt that," she said. I nodded. "It's thinner." Caelan tilted his head. "Or unfiltered." That thought lodged painfully deep. We descended into the ruins in silence. The first chamber we found was circular, its roof long since collapsed. Sunlight poured in through a jagged opening, illuminating a ring of stone benches carved directly from the bedrock. At the center stood a dais, split cleanly down the middle, as if something had struck it with tremendous force. No iconography adorned the walls, no gods, no names, only words, carved deep, deliberate, and scarred. I recognized the script immediately. Pre-Tribunal, older than standardized doctrine, older than the codified oath. My pulse quickened. Bram exhaled slowly. They weren't meant to be seen. Lisa knelt beside one of the carvings, brushing dust away with reverent care. They didn't want them to be read. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and read aloud, without realizing I was doing it. "Judgment is not obedience. It is the burden of choosing when the light is unclear." My mouth went dry. "That's wrong," Maren whispered. "No," Caelan said gently. "That's inconvenient." Another carving caught my eye, half-shattered but legible. A god may command, but command does not absolve conscience. I felt something inside me crack, not shatter, not yet, but fissure, slow and inevitable. This wasn't heresy. This was foundational. I backed away, suddenly dizzy. These aren't interpretations, I said. They're principles. Bram nodded grimly. And they don't survive well in hierarchies. Keth crossed his arms. My people told stories about this place. Not like your books. I turned to him. What kind of story? He hesitated, then shrugged. That the first Paladins weren't chosen because they obeyed. They were chosen because they argued. Lysa looked up sharply. Argued with who? With the gods. Silence fell like a dropped blade. I wanted to deny it. Gods were not to be argued with, questioned perhaps, appealed to reverently, but not challenged, and yet another memory surfaced, unwanted, the voice of Solon, fractured, strained, not angry, afraid. We moved deeper. The archive chamber lay beneath the central platform, reached by a narrow stair spiraling downward. Unlike the rest of the ruins, this place had been sealed, deliberately collapsed, stone fused with magic rather than time. Caelan whistled low. Someone didn't just abandon this. They buried it. After the tribunal rose, Bram said. Not before. Marin drew her sword, not in threat, but in ritual habit, and touched the blade lightly to the sealed stone. Let's see what they didn't want remembered. Lysa stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly. No divine channeling, she warned. Whatever sealed this reacts badly to it. I swallowed and stepped back. The irony was sharp enough to taste. Bram produced a small chisel and hammer. Mundane tools, worn smooth by decades of use. He worked patiently, methodically, loosening stone where magic had once fused it. It took time. No visions came, no voice spoke, and that silence felt heavier than any command. At last, the seal broke with a soft, resigned crack. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of old parchment, dust, and something faintly metallic. Blood. The archive was small but dense. Shelves carved into stone. Scroll cases stacked with care. This wasn't a hoard. It was a record. I lifted the first scroll with trembling hands. The script inside was familiar. Tribunal, early tribunal, but the tone, it wasn't triumphant, it was apologetic. We have made a necessary alteration. The oath, as originally sworn, permits refusal. This cannot stand. My vision blurred. Another scroll. Null Star's descent cannot be allowed to spread. If truth is allowed to contradict command, authority collapses. My breath hitched. Null Star, not the betrayer, not the destroyer, the dissenter. I sank to my knees, scrolls slipping from my grasp. They lied, I whispered. Not mistaken, not misguided. They lied. Maierin knelt beside me, her face pale but fierce. About the oath, about everything. Bram closed his eyes. Caelan stared into the shadows, jaw tight. So the monster in the stories was the conscience. Lysa finished softly. The final scroll bore Solon's sigil, not imposed, not radiant, faded. I consented to the seal. I believed it temporary. I was wrong. The words shook, not metaphorically, literally. The script trembled, as if written by a hand that did not want to continue. I feared chaos more than silence. And so I chose order. I pressed my forehead to the cold stone floor. My God had chosen order over truth, and now he was paying for it. I don't remember how long I stayed there, only that at some point the weight became unbearable, not because it crushed me, but because it demanded something in return. Faith was no longer simple, obedience was no longer innocent, and the oath I had sworn, it had been edited, weaponized, hollowed out. If the gods could be bound, then paladins had never been instruments. They had been fail-safes, and the Tribunal had broken them. I thought the truth would arrive like a blow. I had always imagined revelation as something sudden, a moment where the world split cleanly in two, and you stepped from ignorance into clarity, bleeding but enlightened. This was worse. This was slow. The truth settled into me the way cold seeps into stone. Patient, inevitable, impossible to argue with once it took hold. I sat on the archive floor long after the others had fallen silent. The scrolls lay scattered around me like shed skin. Each one stripped something away. Not just doctrine, but comfort. The kind of comfort that let you sleep at night believing the world made sense because someone else had already decided what was right. Marin finally broke the silence. "So what were we?" she asked quietly. "Before the edits." I swallowed. My throat felt raw, as if I had been screaming without sound. "We were interpreters," I said. "Witnesses. The oath didn't bind us to obedience. It bound us to judgment." Caelan let out a humorless laugh. "That explains why they buried this place instead of burning it. Hard to argue with stone." Lisa hugged her knees to her chest, staring at the scroll with sullen sigil, as though it might move. "He knew," she whispered. "Didn't he?" "Yes," Bram said. His voice was steady, but I heard the weight behind it, the sound of a man finally laying down something he had carried too long. "He knew," Bram repeated. "And so did I." We all turned to him. Bram Ironwalker did not look like a confessor. He was broad, grounded, solid, the kind of man you trusted because he never seemed hurried by revelation. He sat on a fallen stone bench and rested his hammer across his knees, hands folded over it like a pilgrim over a relic. "I didn't leave the Tribunal because I lost faith," he said. "I left because I found records like these." My chest tightened. Enough. His gaze met mine without flinching. Enough to know the oath had been altered. Enough to know Nullstar wasn't a destroyer. Enough to know Solon consented to the seal out of fear. Marin's fingers clenched around her broken gauntlet. "And you never said anything," Bram nodded. "Because I believed, truly believed, that the damage was done, that the best I could do was tend to the wounds, not reopen the scar." His eyes softened as he looked at me. "And then you came to Emberfall, hearing a command you knew was wrong, and you stopped." The word hit me harder than any accusation. Stopped. "I didn't stop because I was brave," I said hoarsely. "I stopped because the voice was broken." "That's the point," Bram replied gently. "If it had sounded whole, you would have obeyed." The room felt smaller. "He's still my god," I said, not sure who I was trying to convince. "Yes," Bram said. "And he is still flawed." That sentence should have been impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. We moved deeper into the ruins after that, not because there was more to find, but because none of us were ready to leave. The deeper chambers were more damaged, not by time, but by force. Scorch marks marred the stone. Sigils had been shattered deliberately, struck again and again until they were unrecognizable. "This wasn't a purge," Caelan murmured, examining a fractured wall. "It was a panic." I stopped before a wide chamber whose ceiling had partially collapsed. At its center stood a ring pillars, 7 of them, broken at varying heights. The 7 lights. My stomach twisted. These were never meant to be thrones, I said slowly. They were counterweights. Lisa frowned. To what? I stepped into the center of the ring. The air changed, not colder, not warmer, honest. Pressure built behind my eyes, familiar now. The sensation I had come to associate with prayer, with attention. Only this time, it wasn't invasive. It wasn't demanding. It was waiting. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since this all began, I didn't reach up. I listened. The light did not rush in. It trembled. Fragments brushed the edge of my awareness. Memories, not mine. Regret so vast, it felt structural. I saw flashes, without vision. A god agreeing to a seal he did not fully understand. Leaders nodding solemnly while already planning how to weaponize the silence. A star of white gold light dragged screaming into containment because it would not call an unjust command righteous. Null star, the dissenter, witness. My knees buckled and I would have fallen if Marin hadn't caught me. "What did you hear?" she asked, urgently. I laughed, weakly. "Nothing." Thalin raised an eyebrow. "That bad, huh?" "No," I said. "That honest." I steadied myself and looked at them. My companions, my witnesses. "He's still there," I said. "Solon, but he isn't whole." Every command I've heard since Dawnspire has been forced through something that doesn't want to let go. Lysa's eyes widened. "The ritual." "Yes." My hands trembled. "Malric isn't stealing divine power. He's redirecting it. Using the oath, like a lever. And the more Paladins obey without question." Bram murmured. "The tighter the bind becomes," I finished. The realization hollowed me out. My faith hadn't been eroded by doubt. It had been used against itself. Night found us camped among the ruins. Fire kept low, words spoken softer than necessary. Sleep did not come easily. I sat apart from the others, staring at the broken pillars, silhouetted against the stars. For the first time in my life, I did not feel watched, and that terrified me. I bowed my head, not in prayer, but in habit. "Solon," I whispered. The response came slowly, faint as a dying ember. "Caelan." The voice was unmistakable, and it was exhausted. "I know," I said, "about the oath, about Nullstar, about the lie." Silence stretched, then not command, not justification, regret. "I thought order would preserve them," the voice said, brittle and worn. I did not foresee what certainty would become in mortal hands. "You let them change it," I said. I agreed to silence. The words shook. I was afraid. Something inside me finally broke. Not my faith, my submission. "You asked me to execute an innocent woman," I said quietly. "You asked me to become what they wanted." The light flickered, not angrily, but in shame. "I am bound," Solon said, "and every command I send passes through that bind. I no longer know which of my words reach you unchanged." My hands curled into fists. "Then stop commanding," I said. The silence that followed was profound. "If I do," Solon whispered, "they will call it heresy." I looked up at the broken stars. "Let them." The light did not answer, but for the first time, it did not push back. When dawn came, pale and uncertain, I stood among the ruins of First Judgment and felt the final shape of my path settle into place. I could not restore the old oath. I could not unbind a god alone, but I could refuse to be a weapon. If Solon was bound, then I would stand where command could not reach, not as an instrument, as a witness, and witnesses do not kneel to lies.